Most people do not lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they become dependent on being liked. Sit with that for a moment. Being liked feels comfortable. It feels safe. It even feels like emotional intelligence, like you're the kind of person who understands people, who keeps the peace, who knows how to navigate a room without making anyone uncomfortable. And for a while, the world rewards this. People praise the agreeable, the accommodating, the person who never creates friction. But beneath that politeness, in most cases, is fear wearing the costume of virtue. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of standing alone in a moment when the people around you want something different from what you know to be true. The Stoics saw this dynamic with uncomfortable clarity. They understood that a person who cannot tolerate disapproval eventually becomes controlled by it. And once approval begins controlling behavior, freedom disappears. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, one small compromise at a time. One softened opinion, one unnecessary apology, one honest thought swallowed before it reached the surface. What makes this so difficult to see is that it happens gradually, and it happens through behavior that everyone around you calls virtue. So you keep going, you keep adjusting, you keep shrinking, all while believing you're becoming better at handling people, better at social situations, better at emotional intelligence, until one day you realize you can no longer clearly hear your own mind above the noise of what everyone else might think about it. Today we're going through 12 dimensions of this problem and the Stoic principles that provide the way out. Not the performance of confidence, not techniques designed to impress, the actual internal work of becoming someone whose stability comes from within, whose words carry weight because they don't chase approval, and whose presence changes every room they walk into before a single sentence is spoken. Stay from beginning to end. This builds. Let's go. The need to be liked is one of the quietest addictions a person can develop. It doesn't look like addiction. It looks like social grace. It looks like emotional sensitivity. It looks like the willingness to consider others, which is genuinely a valuable quality. But there's a version of this that isn't grace at all. There's a version that is simply the nervous system avoiding pain, and the pain it's avoiding is disapproval. Watch how it operates in ordinary moments. A person prepares to share an honest opinion and then hesitates, softens it, adds qualifications before anyone has even responded. Another person makes a clear decision and then immediately explains it in elaborate detail to someone who didn't ask for an explanation. A third person notices a slight shift in the atmosphere, a tone, a look, and starts adjusting their behavior before a single word of objection has been spoken. None of these moments look dramatic from the outside, but each of them is the same thing. The nervous system treating social disapproval as a threat requiring immediate management. The Stoics were direct about what this produces over time. A person who depends on external approval for emotional stability becomes controlled by criticism. Once approval becomes necessary rather than optional, honesty becomes conditional. You begin telling versions of your truth, the versions that are most likely to land well, that won't create distance, that won't cost you something socially. And over time, you lose access to the unfiltered version of your own thinking. What makes this especially difficult to escape is that society rewards the early stages of approval seeking so consistently. The agreeable person gets invited back. The accommodating person gets called thoughtful. The person who never makes anyone uncomfortable gets called emotionally intelligent. So the behavior gets reinforced again and again until it stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like personality. But it isn't personality, it's conditioning. And conditioning, unlike character, was installed from the outside, which means it can be examined and it can be changed. The first step is simply this. Begin noticing when your behavior is coming from clarity versus when it's coming from anticipation of how someone might react. That distinction, small as it sounds, is the beginning of everything else. Most people believe they are emotionally intelligent. What many of them are, in reality, is emotionally reactive in socially acceptable ways. They think maturity means smoothing every disagreement before tension has time to settle. They think wisdom means remaining endlessly agreeable, endlessly available, endlessly easy to handle. So they enter conversations already adjusting themselves before a single word has been exchanged, before anyone has said anything challenging, before any actual conflict has appeared. Their mind scans the room for potential resistance. Their tone shifts depending on who is listening. Their thoughts stop coming from clarity and start coming from anticipation of what clarity might cost them. After enough repetition, this stops feeling exhausting. It becomes automatic. And that's precisely when it becomes dangerous, because a behavior that feels automatic no longer feels like a choice. You've stopped noticing that you're doing it. The person who once consciously softened their opinion now does it before they're even fully aware they had one. The Stoics understood that discomfort is not always a signal to retreat. Sometimes discomfort is simply exposure to truth without the cushion of distraction. The moment silence enters a conversation, most people rush to fill it, not because silence needs filling, but because silence removes performance. It forces you to simply be present with what's actually there. And that exposure, for someone who has spent years managing every emotional atmosphere around them, feels genuinely threatening. This is why people laugh too quickly after making a serious point, why they repeat explanations even after being understood the first time, why they follow up a clear statement with a softening phrase that partially undoes what they just said. They are not always speaking for clarity. They are speaking to escape the tension of not knowing how their words landed. And the more someone fears tension, the more available they become for emotional manipulation. Because anyone who understands that your discomfort will override your judgment has access to you in a very specific and very uncomfortable way. Pressure reveals patterns. A person who cannot tolerate emotional friction will eventually surrender principles just to restore the feeling of temporary comfort. And the world is full of people who know this about you. Not maliciously necessarily, but intuitively. They've learned through interaction how much friction it takes to get you to back down. The question is, when did you first teach them that? Genuine composure is one of the rarest things in modern social life. Because genuine composure requires something that most people find almost physically uncomfortable: the ability to remain present in a moment of tension without immediately doing something to resolve it. Not passive, not checked out, present, grounded, internally still while the atmosphere around you is charged. Most people cannot do this. The moment emotional friction appears, they react. They defend, they explain, they deflect, they over-accommodate. Not because these responses are considered, but because they're instinctive. The nervous system has been conditioned to treat social tension the way it treats physical danger. It wants resolution, it wants it now, and it will produce behavior to achieve that resolution, whether the thinking mind approves or not. Genuine composure interrupts this. It doesn't deny the discomfort, it doesn't pretend the tension isn't there. It simply refuses to let the discomfort dictate the response. And that refusal, that single quiet act of remaining still when everything in the nervous system is pushing toward reaction, is, in practice, one of the most powerful things a person can do in social interaction. Here's why it works. When you don't react the way someone expects you to react, something shifts in them. They were anticipating a predictable response: defensiveness, justification, emotional escalation. And when that predictable response doesn't come, they have to recalibrate. Their certainty about how the interaction will unfold disappears. And in that moment of uncertainty, something interesting happens. They become more attentive. They start thinking rather than just reacting themselves. Composure changes the emotional rhythm of an interaction because it interrupts the unconscious momentum of mutual reactivity. One person stays still, and the whole dynamic shifts. You've probably felt this in reverse, the experience of being around someone who remains genuinely calm when you're bringing some emotional charge into the conversation. Something in you settles slightly. You speak more carefully. You think a little more clearly. You might even, after a moment, hear yourself differently than you did going in. That's composure working, not performance, not technique, just the rare and powerful thing of someone who genuinely doesn't need the moment to go a certain way in order to feel okay. The Stoics weren't talking about emotional coldness when they wrote about self-command. They were talking about exactly this: the capacity to feel what's happening, register it fully, and still choose your response rather than being dragged into it by instinct. That choice, practiced consistently, becomes presence, and presence, over time, becomes the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. Approval is one of the quietest traps because it operates through reward rather than punishment. Nobody forces you into approval seeking. Life simply responds so positively, so consistently, to agreeable behavior in the short term that the pattern establishes itself before you've had time to examine it. And then one day you realize that your honest opinion and your expressed opinion have become two different things, and they've been drifting apart for longer than you realized. The Stoics were direct about what approval dependency does to judgment. Once praise becomes emotionally necessary, standards become flexible, convictions become negotiable. You find yourself in the strange position of knowing what you believe internally, yet adjusting your expression of it the moment you sense even mild resistance. You're not lying exactly. You're softening. You're qualifying. You're being careful. But the effect is the same. What comes out no longer fully reflects what's inside. Epictetus said something that cuts to the center of this. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This is not about being reckless with how you communicate. It is about understanding that genuine growth requires the ability to hold your position, even when someone else's face tells you they don't approve. Because if disapproval is enough to move you, then you're not operating from conviction. You're operating from the audience's reaction to your conviction. You can see this pattern in ordinary conversations with striking clarity. Someone shares an opinion, notices mild disagreement in someone's expression, and immediately starts revising their own point, not because new information appeared, but because approval seemed to shift. Another person apologizes for being honest before anyone has even reacted negatively. A third stays completely silent when everything inside them disagrees with what's happening in the room, because belonging feels more urgent than authenticity in the moment. These behaviors feel safe. They are not safe. Over time, they create a very specific kind of erosion, the gradual loss of access to your own judgment. Because judgment that is never exercised under pressure eventually stops feeling like yours. You've deferred too many times. You've adjusted too consistently. And what's left is a voice that sounds increasingly like a composite of what other people seem to want to hear, and decreasingly like you. The reversal begins with a simple practice. In one conversation today, hold your position one beat longer than you normally would. Not aggressively, just steadily. Let the discomfort of potential disapproval exist without immediately doing something to relieve it. Notice what happens, to them and to you. There is a crucial distinction that most people spend their lives collapsing into a single experience. The difference between appreciating acceptance and depending on it. Appreciating acceptance is healthy. It's human. It feels good when people understand you, when your contributions are valued, when the room receives what you bring to it warmly. None of that is a problem. Depending on acceptance is something entirely different. It means that your emotional baseline, your fundamental sense of okayness, rises and falls with how other people are responding to you in any given moment. It means you enter every interaction already scanning for signs of approval. It means criticism, even mild criticism, doesn't just provide information, it destabilizes you. The Stoics understood that this dependency, however comfortable it might feel in the short term, creates profound vulnerability, because approval can always be withdrawn. And a person whose emotional stability is built on something that can be withdrawn is never truly stable. They're just in a period of not being challenged yet. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is not a motivational phrase. It is a precise description of where actual stability lives and where it does not. It does not live in how well things are going. It does not live in how people are responding to you today. It lives in the quality and discipline of your own thinking, which is the one thing that cannot be taken by external circumstance. The shift that changes everything is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly, in the moment when you realize that someone's disapproval is uncomfortable, but it is not unbearable. That criticism stings but doesn't collapse you. That you can sit inside a moment of not being liked and remain fundamentally recognizable to yourself. That realization, small as it seems, is the beginning of genuine independence. Because once you know you can handle disapproval without falling apart, disapproval stops being the threat that was shaping your behavior all along. From that foundation, something changes in how you move through the world. Your speech becomes cleaner, not because you've become colder, but because you're no longer spending energy preemptively managing everyone's reaction to what you haven't yet said. Your decisions become clearer because they're coming from what you actually think rather than what you've calculated is most likely to go over well. And paradoxically, people trust you more, not less, because they can sense that what you're expressing is actually what you think, and that, in a world full of people adjusting themselves to every available audience, is genuinely rare. Once you begin to understand the approval dependency, a second pattern becomes visible, and this one is even more pervasive because it feels, in the moment, like authenticity. Most people live in a constant state of immediate reaction. Someone sends a message with the wrong tone and anxiety follows before logic has a chance to enter. A small criticism arrives and defenses are already assembling before the full content of the criticism has even been processed. A moment of perceived disrespect appears and anger is already in motion before awareness has had time to intervene. The mind calls this honesty. It calls it being real. It says, "This is just who I am. I respond to things directly. I don't pretend." But the Stoics made a distinction that changes everything. There is a fundamental difference between what you feel and what you choose to do with what you feel. The feeling is not the problem. The feeling is information. The problem is the collapse of the distance between feeling and behavior, the loss of the space in which choice actually lives. Viktor Frankl, who survived conditions that would break most human beings, articulated this with precise clarity. Between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. The Stoics understood the same thing 2,000 years earlier. Most people have surrendered that space entirely. Their emotions dictate timing. Their impulses decide tone. They believe confidence means responding immediately, that hesitation signals weakness, that a pause suggests you don't know your own mind. The opposite is true. A person who pauses before speaking communicates something that cannot be faked. That emotion does not automatically control their behavior, that they observe first, that they assess first, and then they decide. Watch what happens in tense social moments when one person does this. The atmosphere changes. Someone expected defensiveness and got stillness instead. They expected escalation and received measured calm. Their entire anticipation of how the interaction would unfold has just been disrupted, and they have to recalibrate, which means, for a moment, they're actually thinking rather than just reacting. You've taken the tempo away from the emotion and given it back to intention, and that single shift changes not just this interaction, but the entire impression you make over time. Because people notice, even if they can't articulate it, when someone's behavior is not governed by their immediate emotional state. They call it grounded. They call it composed. They call it intimidating sometimes, when what they mean is simply that they can't easily rattle this person. And when they know they can't easily rattle you, they begin approaching you differently, with more thought, more care, more genuine respect. That is what the space between stimulus and response produces when it's developed consciously. Not cold detachment, not robotic emotional suppression, just the rare and profoundly powerful quality of someone who chooses their response rather than being carried by their reaction.
Watch people in difficult moments carefully. Not what they say, how quickly they respond. How quickly they reach for their phone after receiving a challenging message. How urgently they feel compelled to address criticism. How uncomfortable they become when silence stretches just a few seconds longer than expected. Beneath that urgency, in almost every case, is emotional dependency. The mind fears losing control of perception. It fears that if it doesn't immediately manage the moment will define things in a way that can't be corrected. So it reacts instantly in an attempt to restore certainty. But urgency rarely improves clarity. In most situations, it weakens it, and more than that, urgency exposes something. It reveals that the person is emotionally governed by the moment rather than anchored beyond it. That their internal stability depends, at least partly, on how things are unfolding right now. Contrast this with the person who receives difficult feedback and says nothing immediately, who lets a charged moment exist without rushing to fill it, who responds to hostility with a measured pause rather than matching the energy. The impression created is entirely different, not because they perform something, but because their emotional state is genuinely not fully determined by what just happened. The Stoics practice timing as a form of discipline, not because delay is always better than speed, sometimes it isn't, but because the ability to delay, to not be compelled by emotional urgency, is itself evidence of internal order. It demonstrates that you are operating from a place that exists beyond the immediate pressure of the moment, and practically, measured responses almost always produce better outcomes than urgent ones. The message you draft in the heat of frustration and send immediately creates consequences that the same message sent an hour later never would have. The argument you escalate because silence felt unbearable produces damage that patience would have avoided. The explanation you rush to provide before anyone has even challenged you reveals insecurity that silence would have concealed. Calm timing is not passive. It is a form of precision. It says, I will engage with this when I understand it clearly and can respond intentionally, not simply because the emotional pressure of not responding has become uncomfortable. That difference between responding from clarity and responding from pressure is one of the quietest but most powerful distinctions in how people experience you over time. One of the quietest ways people lose themselves is through the inability to limit what they give without feeling guilty about limiting it. They keep extending patience long after patience has stopped producing anything meaningful. They keep offering access long after access stopped being respected. They keep giving emotional energy to relationships that have become fundamentally one-directional, not because they believe this is working, but because withdrawing feels like a moral failure. Modern culture reinforces this. Endless availability gets called kindness. Unlimited tolerance gets called emotional maturity. The person who never says no gets called generous. And so the behavior continues, not from genuine choice, but from the fear that choosing differently would make you a bad person. But Seneca saw this clearly. Real discipline is not endless self-sacrifice. It is knowing when compassion becomes self-abandonment. There is a specific kind of internal fracture that happens when you consistently act against your own awareness. It doesn't happen loudly. Conversations start feeling heavier than they should. Certain relationships begin producing exhaustion before they've even started. Support starts to feel like obligation, and underneath the forced generosity, resentment quietly forms. Not because you're a resentful person, but because your mind recognizes an imbalance that your mouth has been refusing to acknowledge. The distinction the Stoics would draw is between two very different kinds of kindness. Fear-based kindness avoids limits because it depends on maintaining approval. The person worries that saying no will create distance, disappointment, or conflict, and so they sacrifice their own comfort repeatedly to preserve the feeling of being accepted. On the surface, this looks generous. Internally, it creates instability because the behavior is consistently misaligned with what the person actually knows to be true about the situation. Strength-based kindness is different. It remains genuinely compassionate without becoming self-destructive.
It understands that care does not require unlimited access, that respect is not the same as constant availability, that sometimes the healthiest response to a draining dynamic is quiet distance, not dramatic confrontation, not elaborate explanation, just the simple act of no longer extending yourself in a direction that costs you more than it creates. And the people who react most strongly to this kind of boundary, they were almost always the ones benefiting most from its absence. What makes limits difficult is that many people associate them with aggression. They believe that setting boundaries requires conflict, emotional speeches, dramatic confrontations, painful separations. But emotionally disciplined people often adjust access without drama. They simply stop overextending. They become more intentional. They reduce engagement in areas where engagement has stopped being genuinely mutual. No performance, no hostility, just awareness, quietly guiding behavior toward greater alignment with what they actually know. And something interesting happens when you do this consistently. People begin noticing that your attention is no longer automatic, that your presence requires something, not as a transaction, but as a natural consequence of you being someone who values where your energy goes. And when attention must be earned rather than assumed, people begin treating it very differently. Even people who have developed genuine inner stability often get caught by this one, because it disguises itself as responsibility, as clarity, as the respectful effort to make sure you're being understood. The trap is over-explanation, the constant need to clarify every decision, justify every action, resolve every potential misunderstanding before discomfort has had a chance to settle. A simple statement becomes a paragraph. A clear decision becomes an elaborate defense. Someone asks a direct question and receives 10 minutes of contextual framing in return. And the person doing it feels, in the moment, like they are simply being thorough, responsible, clear. But beneath the thoroughness, in most cases, is something else. The fear of being judged incorrectly, the fear of disappointing someone, the fear of losing approval because another person formed a negative interpretation. And when that fear takes over, speech stops serving communication and starts serving emotional protection. The telling sign is urgency. When the explanation keeps going after the listener has clearly received the point. When the justification extends beyond what the situation actually required. When you find yourself revisiting something you already said, to reinforce it, to make sure it landed right, to give it a better chance of producing the reaction you were hoping for. Epictetus said it simply: we have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. This is not advice about politeness. It is a description of what disciplined communication actually looks like and what it produces. Because restraint in speech is not the same as withholding. A concise answer delivered with calm carries more authority than an elaborate defense precisely because it signals that the person is not panicking beneath the surface. They are not scrambling to repair every possible misunderstanding. They are grounded enough to let their words stand on their own, and willing to tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing exactly how those words were received. That tolerance is what most people lack. They need to know. They need the feedback, the confirmation, the expression on the other person's face that says, yes, I understood you, and I received it well. And in pursuing that confirmation and extending the conversation until it arrives, they reveal, consistently, that their emotional state is not fully settled within themselves. It is waiting for input from outside. The Stoics called this inner direction, the ability to assess your own actions and words against your own principles, rather than against the reactions of your audience. When that capacity is developed, the need to over-explain diminishes naturally, not because you've stopped caring about communication, but because you've separated the quality of what you said from the question of how it was received. Those are 2 different questions, and conflating them is the source of most unnecessary explanation. Try this. In your next difficult conversation, say exactly what needs to be said, and then stop. Let silence exist. Let the moment settle without rushing to fill it with supplementary reassurance. Notice the discomfort of not knowing immediately how it landed, and notice, if you stay with it, that the discomfort passes, and that what you said remains standing without the additional architecture you almost built around it. Once you begin developing a kind of internal stability we've been discussing, something happens that is difficult to predict until it starts occurring. Conversations stop feeling like simple exchanges of words. Patterns become visible underneath them. Emotional structure becomes readable in real time. The person who constantly seeks reassurance gives away their leverage before a word of substance is exchanged. Through the excessive explanation, the nervous adjustment of tone, the way their energy changes when someone in the room seems unmoved by what they've said. The person who interrupts consistently isn't being rude intentionally in most cases. They're managing anxiety. Silence in their nervous system is a threat to connection that must be preempted. The person who laughs after every serious statement isn't lighthearted. They're releasing tension that directness creates. The one who overqualifies every opinion isn't being balanced. They're managing the risk of standing somewhere publicly. Once you see these patterns, you cannot unsee them. And more importantly, you stop being automatically pulled into them. Because the behavior that manipulates, that destabilizes, that creates unconscious pressure, it depends almost entirely on predictable emotional reactions from the other person. When those predictable reactions don't arrive, the behavior loses much of its power. The Stoics valued observation as a form of discipline, not as detachment, but as the practice of creating distance between awareness and impulse. When emotion stops completely controlling perception, clarity increases. You begin noticing what's actually happening rather than just experiencing it, and that noticing gives you options that reactivity never does. You can respond to what's actually present rather than what you assumed would be present. You can see when someone's aggression is driven by fear rather than confidence, and respond to the fear rather than the aggression, which changes everything. You can recognize when you're being tested and simply not provide the reaction that the test was designed to elicit. This isn't manipulation, it's presence. The clear-eyed, emotionally grounded presence of someone who is actually paying attention, not just to the words, but to the full emotional reality of what's unfolding in the room. And over time, people feel this about you. They may not be able to name it, but they sense that something about interacting with you requires more thought than their usual unconscious social behavior produces. That sense, that careful attention is being paid, that automatic patterns won't simply work as they normally do, is itself a form of social authority that doesn't require force, volume, or dominance. It just requires paying attention when most people are simply reacting. Once your observation sharpens, effort imbalance becomes impossible to ignore. And once you see it clearly, it changes how you distribute your attention in ways that quietly transform every significant relationship in your life. The pattern is everywhere. One person constantly initiates, keeps conversations alive through their own effort, offers reassurance, follows up, adapts their behavior to preserve the connection. The other person contributes little while receiving significant emotional investment, and the first person continues, not because they're unaware exactly, but because they fear that stopping will cost them the relationship entirely. The problem, beyond the obvious imbalance, is what excessive effort communicates. Human beings, whatever we might prefer to believe about ourselves, do not generally value what appears effortlessly and endlessly available. We value what appears to require something: care, reciprocity, selective attention. When presence is automatic and unlimited, it begins registering as a given rather than a gift, and things taken for granted are not things treated with care. This means that the very effort invested in preserving the relationship is often undermining the respect within it. The harder someone works to maintain a connection through one-sided investment, the more they are teaching the other person that their presence can be had without genuine reciprocity. The Stoics trained awareness specifically around this kind of dynamic, not to create coldness or transactional relationships, but to ensure that the finite resource of attention is invested in directions where it produces something real. Calm people become selective naturally, not because they've decided to be strategic about withholding themselves, but because they've come to understand that attention shapes emotional life in fundamental ways. The quality of your experience, your clarity, your energy,
Your capacity to think and engage and create depends significantly on where your attention flows and where it is prevented from flowing. Becoming more intentional with that resource is not selfishness. It is the basic maintenance of the instrument through which everything else in your life is experienced and built. When you stop distributing attention carelessly, when presence becomes intentional rather than automatic, relationships reorganize themselves. Some deepen because they were genuinely reciprocal, and the shift reveals rather than creates their quality. Others reveal themselves as they actually were, sustained only by your effort, and likely to fade when that effort becomes appropriately selective. The fading of those relationships is not a loss, it is clarity. And clarity, however uncomfortable in the moment it arrives, is always more useful than the managed illusion of connection that required your constant work to maintain. Here is the final pattern, and in many ways the most important one. Reputation is not built in the significant moments, it is built in the ordinary ones. Most people think of reputation as something formed through major achievements or dramatic displays of character. In reality, perception forms through repetition, through the small behaviors people witness again and again across ordinary interactions. The way someone responds to mild criticism, the way they handle being interrupted, the way their tone shifts or doesn't shift when they're under pressure. The way they behave when they think the moment isn't important enough to matter. These moments are always important enough to matter, because every one of them teaches the people around you what to expect from you. An expectation, established through repetition, not declaration, shapes social dynamics more powerfully than most people ever realize. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The true man is revealed in difficult times." This is not primarily a statement about how to handle crises. It is a description of how character becomes visible and how the visibility of character shapes the way others approach you before any conversation begins. A person who loses composure whenever frustration appears gradually becomes known for instability. A person who consistently seeks approval gradually becomes associated with uncertainty. A person who holds their position calmly under pressure over and over in small ordinary moments gradually becomes someone others expect steadiness from. An expectation is social reality. Once people expect you to be steady, they begin treating you as steady, and that treatment reinforces the identity itself. This is why discipline over time matters more than performance in the moment, because performance fluctuates, it requires energy, it depends on conditions, and people can sense when they're watching effort rather than character. But discipline, practiced consistently enough, eventually stops being effort. It becomes integrated. The behavior that was once a choice becomes the default. The composure that once required concentration becomes the natural starting point. When that integration happens, social dynamics shift almost automatically. People test less, they push less. They bring more care to interactions, not because they've been warned to, but because their experience of you has established, through repetition, what kind of engagement produces what kind of response. And the quiet authority that produces, the authority of someone whose character is consistent enough to be genuinely relied upon, is not the loud kind that demands acknowledgement. It is the rare kind that people feel before a word is exchanged. They adjust without being asked to. They pay attention without being instructed to. They think more carefully because they've learned, through consistent experience, that careful thought is what the interaction requires. That is what the Stoics were pointing toward when they spoke of self-command. Not the performance of strength, the practice of it, daily, in small moments, through the repeated choice to respond from discipline rather than impulse, from clarity rather than comfort, from inner stability rather than the approval of whoever happens to be in the room. Until one day that choice is no longer a choice, it's simply who you are. 12 patterns. One consistent thread running through all of them. The strongest people are not the loudest. They are not the coldest. They are not the most feared, the most dominant, or the most strategically impressive.
They are the ones who remain steady when emotions try to pull them away from themselves. The ones who no longer need constant approval to feel secure in who they are. The ones who can sit in silence without rushing to fill it. Who can hold their position without needing every person in the room to agree with it. Who can tolerate being misunderstood without immediately launching into the defense. Who can set a limit without a speech. Who can walk into a room and be genuinely, consistently, quietly themselves, regardless of what the room seems to want from them. That kind of strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't perform. It doesn't require an audience. It's simply present, in the pause before the response, in the calm beneath the pressure, in the small daily choices to act from clarity rather than from the fear of what might happen if clarity costs you something. The Stoics spent their lives building this, not in dramatic philosophical declarations, in the ordinary moments. The moment of mild criticism met without defensiveness. The moment of disapproval tolerated without capitulation. The moment of silence held without anxiety. The moment of honest opinion expressed without the apology that almost followed it. Small moments, repeated consistently, until the person they were trying to become was simply the person they were. That's available to you, not through performance, through practice, through the quiet, daily, unglamorous discipline of choosing who you are in moments that feel too small to matter, and understanding that those moments, accumulated across a life, are the only thing that actually does. If this stayed with you, keep building. That's all it takes.